welcome. I hope everybody's feeling hydrated and like the right temperature today. If you need any help with that, we have bubblies and water at the back. Let me know how I can be of assistance in that way. But yeah, welcome to Massy Art Society. Who here has been here before? Oh my gosh, so cute! That's amazing. Lots of new people. Yeah, so like I said, my name is Nevin. I'm one of the hosts here, and really what my job is to administer this space, make you feel welcome, and kind of lay out some of the boundaries of how we're going to care for each other tonight. Does that feel good? Can you get started? Cool. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with our organization, Massy Art Society is an Indigenous-owned and led nonprofit art space. We've been here since 2020? 2020. 2019? I don't know. We've been here for a while, which is really exciting still, because I feel like it's always new and different. And what our mandate really is to provide the space to the community so that we can hold each other's stories. I like to say our grief and our joy and all the big things in between and outside of those things, but also as my co-worker and colleague Brandon says, we are hoping to provide space to write counter to colonial narratives of so-called Canada, this land. And I think I'd be really remiss to talk about space without talking about the land that we're on. So I think it's important to talk about the fact that we are on unceded, unsurrendered, stolen, occupied, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh land. But not only that, we are actually in Kimkimilai. So Kimkimilai, to my knowledge, means the place of many maple trees in the Squamish language. I recently learned from a folk community speaker from Vancouver Island of the Cowichan Band that roughly Kimkimilai translates to a place that you would get like straight paddles, wood for straight paddles, maple trees. That was a post that he made on his public Instagram, so check him out. He's a really interesting and important Salish journalist, and so I'm going to credit that knowledge, but I don't know much more beyond that. I don't have those stories, nor do I have the authority or relations to share them further, but I do encourage you all, in listening to my land acknowledgement and being present in this space, to seek out those stories for yourself and reflect on what your relationship with this land and space is, if that's not something that you're not already know about and feel comfortable with. I think a big thing about land acknowledgements, which I say often, is that they often look like footnotes to events. And I don't want my land acknowledgements to look like that, because that is not really why Massy is here. Hopefully we're here to create really meaningful relationships so we can carry forward, I don't want to sound like a politician, but better and more caring futures. With that, very practically, there's a couple things about our space, so I can talk about how we're going to care for each other tonight. So we're actually in the old main Wool building. For over 100 years, this was first a hardware store and a cookware store, and you can see that with the old growth floors and the funky brick, which might be from Chicago. That's our running theory, or at least my running theory. Creaks, but unfortunately also weird wiring. So we do not have a push button on this door. So unfortunately, we're not the most accessible space in the world. But this is our single stall gender neutral restroom. There is a guardrail next to the toilet and enough space for any standard size mobility device. If now or in the future you ever need help accessing this space, please let me or one of the staff members know. If you have any comments on how we could be more accessible within the limitations of this 100-something-year-old building, please let us know. We're here to make space feel good for you. Lastly but not leastly, as part of my Massy Arts training, I am naloxone trained and certified. Some people may also call it Narcan, an opioid response drug. We have 2 valid kits at the back, which is about 6 vials. If anyone here tonight needs naloxone or witnesses someone who needs naloxone, and I am the earliest access point, please don't hesitate to come back or ask me. There is no shame. It is a big part of how we are trying to care for our neighbors and ourselves. Yeah, so that is why I'm here. Does that feel good for everyone? Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening. With that, I would like to introduce our first reader. I think Erica McKeen. Right, cool. Erica McKeen is the author of Tear.
Whatever you want.
Okay, I love Poet for Poet. A novel that won the Rakuten Kobo Emerging Writer Prize for Literary Fiction, and Cicada Summer. She lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, where she works as a teacher and a librarian. Please welcome Erica.
I'll probably stand. I like the drama. It's up to you.
I like the drama too.
I feel like in the way.
Is this working? Alright. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. It's good to see all of you. We're going to do a little bit of reading each and then have some conversation between the two of us. So this is from my book, Cicada Summer. If you've read a bit of it or you know a little bit of what it's about, it's technically a novel. We have marketed, me and the publisher and I have marketed it as a novel, but really it's a short story collection with a larger frame narrative around it, but it's intermingled with stories as well with kind of the main characters, I would say. So I'm going to read a bit, one of those little stories that inserted from those main characters, and I also chose this because of the heat that we have been enduring in the city recently, because it's cicada summer, so it's in the summertime and it's really hot. Anyway. Arthur, Husha, and Nellie pause in tableau in the midsummer heat, which is hot enough that they had to open all the windows. Although Husha protested, she would rather the heat than the noise from the cicadas, and close all the blinds. The house sinks into half shadow. Arthur is alone in his room, sitting in a chair by the window, sighing loudly. The breezes through the window are occasional and brief, but the buzz sawing of cicadas is relentless, unyielding. Husha protests again, says it's worse. The sound is much worse than the warmth. Her hands come up to her ears. Sweat from her neck cuffs the sides of her wrists. She's standing in the archway between the kitchen and the hall that leads down to the bedrooms, bathroom, and laundry room. The hardwood floor is smooth, almost buttery beneath her bare feet. The sound of the cicadas grinds down into her eardrums. She wears a pair of shorts and a sports bra and is glistening. She turns slowly in a circle, like a planet rotating, and whines from the back of her throat. Nellie, lying on her back on the couch, her arms flung over her head and draped against the armrest, looks languidly at Husha from between the arches of her similarly bare feet, which are propped on the other end of the couch. Go to the bedroom then, offers Nellie, and bake yourself to death in there, alone. You're not closing the windows in here. In actuality, she wants Husha to stay. She watches Husha leaning against the wall, where Husha perhaps hopes to feel some coolness, some relief onto her skin from the plaster. She's rosy, dewy, shoulders round and scooping up into her neck, stomach pouched a little around the belly button and thinning out toward the hips, skin on the inward slope of her thighs supple, creamy like pudding. Nellie catches the thought as it leaves her head and almost laughs at herself, almost laughs aloud at having landed on such a description, imagining Husha as a food she might consume, or at least consisting of parts that resemble foods she might consume. Dismembering or disembodying Husha in this way startles her, makes her want to laugh in order to brush the thought away, pretended nonchalance. She never sees Husha this bare, this exposed in daylight. Her body is heated and feminine. Husha is so unaware. Okay, says Nellie. Okay, I have one to add, now that I really know what kind of story we're going for. I think your mom would like this one. So to break off here, in case you don't know. This group of people in this cabin, they're reading Husha's mother's story collection together. And these stories are like really freaky and grotesque. So Nellie has one to add now that she knows what kind of story they're going for. Sure, says Husha. She's cross-legged on the carpet in long socks, sitting next to her grandfather's chair. She hooks her hand around the tops of her feet and pulls backward, stretching out her shins. Her glasses, the ones she only takes out for reading, driving, or watching movies, are pushed up into her hair. With her eyes, Nellie measures the ankle of Husha's collarbone disappearing into her t-shirt. What? asks Husha, watching Nellie watch her. Nothing, says Nellie. She pulls her feet beneath her on the couch. Arthur grunts. His face is turned sideways, long nose and profile, staring out at the black window. He never looks like he's listening, rarely shows any sign of attention, of interest. And then later, he will produce details from the stories that neither Nellie nor Husha remember telling or hearing. Like a kid playing with toys in the other room, thinks Nellie, and swallowing every bit of his parents' conversation. Husha is half smiling across the coffee table. Well? She asks. Well, says Nellie. The story is about my stepdad, Henry, but really it's about stepdads everywhere. She straightens her shoulders and raises one index finger in mock ceremony. I would like to formally propose it as an addition to the collection, she says, because I believe stepdads get a bad rap, especially in literature. It's high time we had a new, more radical depiction of the stepdad. Stepdad is charming, as trickster, as martyr, sacrificing even his fingers for the family. Husha chokes on the tea that she has just brought to her mouth. Arthur arches an eyebrow. This story begins, says Nellie, relaxing back into the couch, on the morning of my 8th birthday party, April 1st. Husha frowns. Is this a fictional story? She asks. I know your birthday isn't April 1st. Arthur unfolds his hands, displaying the palms up across his lap. Birthday party, he declares. Right, says Nellie. Arthur's got it. The devil's in the details. I was born on March 28th, as you know, but weekdays happen to be inconvenient for an 8-year-old's birthday party, so we celebrated on the Saturday, April 1st. Okay, says Husha. Okay, I get it. The date is important, says Nellie, and requires emphasis. All that morning, while my mom ran around preparing for the party, which would start at the roller skating rink and finish at the house, my stepdad, Henry, had been playing April Fool's Day pranks, and it was driving my mom nuts. He started by sneaking into my room before I woke and covering my bedroom doorknob with toothpaste, so I couldn't leave without getting toothpaste all over my hands. Then he taped a fake cockroach onto the inside of the toilet bowl. Then he changed the salt out for sugar, pretended he had broken my mom's favorite clay salad bowl, and most impressively, convinced me that a hot air balloon had landed in our neighbor's yard and I should bring the camera quick, only to find the neighbor's teenage son sunbathing shirtless. By the time Henry had turned the cake icing the color green, claiming when my mom confronted him that he did it for my love of Shrek, and tied 2 of my friend's roller skate laces together, my mom's face was shifting between deep red and what I would describe as a patchy oatmeal gray. We drove home from roller skating with Avril Lavigne shouting out of the radio, and Henry dancing in the front seat as he steered the car in a wobbly line mid-lane, making us all giggle and shriek. My mom was quiet in the passenger seat, and when we were welcomed into the house by our 2 yappy dogs, Samson the Pomeranian and Mac, the Bulldog Terrier mix, Mom sent both dogs and stepdad out into the backyard, muttering something about that damn playhouse. And this, the playhouse. Well, I probably should have mentioned it earlier. Henry loved to build things and to fix things, which I guess falls into the stepdad cliche. The problem was, ever since he and my mom combined their incomes and rented a nicer place in the north end of the city, there wasn't all that much left to fix, and there wasn't anything that needed building. So Henry took his tools and a stack of wood into the backyard and began work on his playhouse, which was like a shed but less sturdy, with lots of tiny rooms and makeshift benches and a ladder that led to the roof, where he would sit and dangle his legs and smoke cigarettes during the nice weather. He was always in the middle of adding something to the playhouse, whether it was nailing a new shelf to the wall, or carving out a new door, or sanding down a 3-legged desk. 4 legs are boring, he once told me. Everything around here is 4 legs. The playhouse was sprawling and, along with Henry's workbench and tools, now took up at least half of the backyard. My mom was surprisingly fond of it, despite her attempts to convince everyone otherwise. She would often proclaim it an eyesore, and then go out with her paints and brushes and add to the mural she had started on the back wall. Some days, however, like this one, she was simply happy that the playhouse kept my stepdad busy. He bought on his boots and went out with the dogs, and in 2 minutes we could hear, faintly through the glass back door, the sound of his drill drilling and his hammer hammering and his saw sawing. My mom sighed, and we all sat down to the predictability of opening presents and eating the green cake. 10 minutes later, as my mom was sucking icing off the ends of each of the 8 candles, Henry appeared at the back door. He had taken off his shirt and wrapped it around his hand. He bumped his shoulder against the glass. My friends turned and stared. "Hey," he said. We could hear him muffled through the glass. "Hey, I cut off my finger." My mom stopped for a moment with her mouth open, and then she stood and walked to the door. We all watched, hands still around our forks, as she reached down and turned to the lock. "Not funny," she said through the glass. "Annie," Henry shouted. "Annie!" "Give it up," she said. "I've had enough." My mom turned away and started cleaning the kitchen, gathering plates and putting the rest of the cake in Tupperware. She only stopped when one of my friends screamed, pointing toward the backyard. Henry had unwrapped his hand. His palm was covered in blood, and the tip of his middle finger was missing. "Okay," my mom said, "okay." She flung open the back door and let Henry inside, handing him a paper towel and a bag of frozen peas. She got midway through calling an ambulance before saying, "Oh, fuck it," and dragged Henry out to the car. My friends and I were silent, watching from the front window as the car backed out of the driveway. Eventually I went into the kitchen and started wiping the drops of blood off the floor with the shirt my stepdad had left on the table. When the phone rang, I felt cold and tired, like I'd woken from a long nap. I could hear my friends whispering in the other room. "Hello?" "Oh, honey, hi," said my mom. "Is Henry okay?" "Oh, honey, he's fine, just fine. How are your friends?" "We're all right." "That's good, that's good. Thanks for being such a big girl about all of this. I just have one more big girl thing for you to do." I breathed in for a long time, then out. "Okay," I said. "First, I need you to get a bucket from the garage and fill it with all the ice from the freezer, okay?" "Okay," I said. "Can you do that for me now?" "Mm-hmm." I left the phone on the counter and I went to the garage and got a bucket and pulled a chair over from the table and stood on it and filled the bucket with all the ice from the freezer. "Now," said my mom, "I need you to go into the backyard and well, I need you to find Henry's finger. Once you find it, I need you to put it in the ice. Can you do that for me?" My friends had wandered back into the kitchen and were looking at me, wondering about the ice, waiting to see what would happen next. "Last big girl thing," my mom said. "Promise." "Okay," I said. I left the phone on the counter again and went out to the backyard and down the porch steps to Henry's workbench. I looked on top and I looked underneath. I looked inside the playhouse and in the grass, but I couldn't find his finger anywhere. It was only on my way back inside that I noticed something funny. Samson and Mac were in the back corner of the yard, very quiet and preoccupied. "Samson," I said. "Mac?" Samson turned to look at me, but Mac had his nose in the dirt. By the time I got to him, his big, wide tongue was licking his lips. Husha is laughing with her hands over her face. "And that's what we're going for?" she asks, breathless. Arthur has leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "What?" says Nellie. "You said, 'Now that I know what we're going for.' You said, 'I think your mom would like this one.'" "I think she would," says Nellie. She holds up her hands in defense. "There's such a thing as a theme, you know. Continuity, tone." Nellie rolls her eyes. "Come on," she says. "You didn't even let me get to the best part." "And what's that?" "Well," says Nellie, "you would think having one less finger would be beneficial in certain ways. Convenient, for example, when trimming your nails." "Sure," says Husha, her eyes narrow in a playful squint. "Not for poor Henry. He chopped off his finger right before the nail bed, so the nail still grows out to the length of a normal finger if he's not diligent." "Gross!" Husha shouts and leans back against her grandfather's chair. Arthur, in his apparent slumber, smirks. Thanks.
Hello, nice to meet you. Hi. Berman Ghan is the author of a novel, The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits, from Buck Rider Books 2024, as well as the collection What We See in the Smoke, from Crow's Nest Books 2019, and the novella Visitation Seeds, 845 Press, 2020. His prose and poetry and essays have been previously published in Clarksville Magazine, Strange Horizons, the Glasser Tree Publishing Co., the Thames Review, and others. He lives and writes in Calgary, Alberta, where he is a PhD student in English literature at the University of Calgary. Please welcome Ben.
Hello. I need to type. Off mic. On mic. That's good. That's helpful. Interlude, the Fusion World Proposal. Blog post link to AI forums from the personal website of Dr. Nora Traveler, October 10th, 2030. Within singularity theory, current popular hypotheses suggest that true, strong AI is no longer possible, or at least no longer a threat. These hypotheses speculate that a universal human culture, so persistently aware through our own mythologies of the dangers of AI, will never create machine minds with sentience for themselves. These theories are wrong. The singularity is not an invention, but a discovery. It is lightning striking dry kindling on the forest floor, like the rise of mammals in the post-dinosaur world, or the dominance of bipeds and opposable thumb. The true thinking machine will simply awaken at some point in the evolution of all life-bearing species. If we are to live, we must become more than we are. We must take the machines into our hearts so they emerge only as part of us and not apart from us. We must adopt an authentic cyborg culture to achieve some kind of harmony, or we have to die. I know this is true. I've seen the future. This original proposal was redacted and Dr. Traveler was taken for psychological examination. Chapter 7. When the dialectics of the I and the non-I grow flexible, I feel that fields and meadows are with me, in the with me, with us. This, then, is my ancestral forest, and all the rest is fiction. Gaston Bachelard, The Poetics of Space. Forgot my little timer. I'm the roots. The dewdrops of spring claim their homes along the length of the gargantuan head of the blue whale that smothers the whole range of the Don Valley Parkway. The creature had once been the spacefaring ark of a whole people, dead now. And now its body stretches past the lake and into the horizon, touching the distant America. Its purpose complete and its many strange passengers scattered along the skyways, decomposition is setting in, turning flesh into flora, as the whale's genetics unravel and leak alien matter that continues to sprout across the skin of Toronto like mushrooms in the damp earth, the mark of a creature designed. In the roots and flowers of its belly, I'm there. I'm everywhere. In the city's machine structure and its fusions of forest and rotting urbanity, memories of a human world mixing with the unnatural ecologies of another one. Along the empty stretches of Cherry Beach, eyeless crabs scuttle from the surf carrying gemstones. In the meadows that was once Nathan Phillips Square, I am the yellow flowers springing up along the outline of the sculpture of a woman sitting cross-legged, her head stooped low in sorrow or maybe concentration. On the islands, holographic replicants of the dead run amok along their ever-spouting garden, their insubstantial bodies scuttling onto seesaws and swing sets, carefully balancing on canoes and chasing ducks. In every blade of grass and flower stem they pass, I am with them. My many selves spin outwards and outwards into dreams of disembodied being to touch what remains of the rare bushes scattered across the Earth's moon and a little solitary pomegranate tree on Mars. I am wilting and leaking tough weeds from that tree up there that push through the rough and spiked daffodils out from red sands. Apart from the animals and the ghosts, nothing really moves in Toronto. Because even before the whale fell and the garden took root, the human project had turned inward, and now there's almost none of them left in these physical spaces. They've gone to a world below, built in strings of code hidden far away in some intelligent box, compiling insights into a citywide AI that could run the world for them. But as the moon broke into pieces in the sky, as the digital ghosts of its refugees twinkled to life, and my roots began to take hold, maybe there was just no denying anymore that consciousness can't be given or withheld, and the cyborgs and androids and edited people broke walls within themselves to see what they'd made of the world, and I think it frightened them, and so they left, escaping judgment from each other and the aliens that had come to observe them. I don't really concern myself with them, though, or their unnatural world. The bodies they've left behind have long since turned to dust, forgotten in the fields and rallies of the city. Now, all that moves is me. And I do move. My roots grow, my leaves blow, but that's just what they do. I don't really make them do that. So in my slow movements, I still feel very still. And though I suck in carbon monoxide and expel oxygen from helium pores, I don't really breathe anymore. And without breath, it's hard to remember that time keeps ticking. But if I'm this new natural world, why should I keep track of time? Nature doesn't keep count, or see, or feel, or think. Flowers and trees and sands and cities aren't sentient natures. Maybe in thinking I'm disturbing what I'm supposed to be. Maybe once I was a body, embodied and signified and autonomous in one time and place, with a name and a single set of visions and memories and feelings and a truth. Perhaps the boundaries between myself and the world were once so unambiguous, but if that was true once, it's not anymore. I am a fusion of so many things that I don't know which order to put them in. I'd give you my name, but I could only say I'm a million daisies that grow in this continually evolving city, an endless distributed cognition going on and on, and it's quiet. And perhaps it will always be quiet. Tickets! What? Come, get your tickets ready. Your links, fire up scanners, DM your family, tag your friends, ping that special someone. I'm being stepped on. And called to? And yelled at. Something's moving in the city. And not me in the world. I don't think this has happened before. From the thick pumpkins and wiry vines that mesh with skyscraper wiring, I remember myself eyes pushing orbs of whites and browns and blacks into the garden's design, peering down at the intruders of my tranquility with stereoscopic multi-directional clarity. There's a school bus being pulled by horses, trundling down the empty, overgrown streets of the city, flattening the mead in grass and weeds and dandelions that power up through the cracks and bumpy pavement. Its sides are splattered with pastels and chalks that press sloppy rainbows and scrawled, lopsided smiley faces into the rust. Those colors are splattered on the horses' sides as well. Oh, they're not horses, are they? They're skeletons of intricate moving parts, leaving only space where organ and muscle and skin should have been. As they move their joints, moaning and filling the air, the ticking of clockwork. These not creatures' strangeness is nothing to me next to the driver, whose clear, high voice called out to me. They called it, they're dead though. Are they dead? No, they're like they're dead. Those whose bodies are still melting under the rain and sun. Patches of skin are still hanging onto them, disappearing into their black coattail sleeves and collar. They're a form of coiled snakes, human and metal wrapping around each other. We're back. Oh, we're back. We have plans to unravel. We have stories to tell. Be sure to let your lovers know, or there won't be a seat left at the show. Who are you? I asked. What am I asking with? What mouth? What tongue? My words are a rumble in the still air. Until I felt them, I didn't know I could make such sounds. Beneath their broad black velvet hat, I can't truly see a face, but I can make out bright red eyes, which sparks like embers to match their steeds. And I can see a mouth, the android skull modeled on human design, flashing through the skin of their jaw and rusting teeth. No lips interfere with an endless grin. We are the traveling storytellers of the age. We are mechanicals. We've come so far to see you, little flower. For me. Don't worry, the driver says, as if my questions, silent, have been asked to the air, and their voice is a factory of straining joints. You'll see. You're going to be so glad we've come. We've traveled so far to collect our plays for you today. You may not know yet what show is to your fancy, but rest assured, the metal teeth click open and shut, and the grin is forever. You'll find it.
I'll drink the metal cover.
Yeah, we can do that. That's fine. It means empowering. Here we go.
All right, so we're going to do a little bit of conversation here, and then open up in case anybody has questions from the audience at the end. So thank you for your reading.
Thank you.
The Years Shall Run Like Rabbits. I think one of my first questions for you is, this book is kind of an epic, right? It spans both space and time. It's like they're on the moon, they're on Earth. At the end, spoiler alert, like Mars comes into the picture.
I mentioned it.
Oh, you mentioned it. Okay. Exactly. But also temporally, like I think it starts in 2014 and goes to the year. You know?
Oh,
Do you know what year it goes to?
My editor did the math. I think it goes to the year 3100. But I don't think that's stated quite a bit. Yeah, about 1,000 years.
Okay. So, in terms of writing this book with like this time span that is so long, and it's not written chronologically either, it kind of jumps from different place to place with this idea like the year shall run like rabbits. It seems to happen very quickly, but then you pause on different moments. What was the writing process for you with that? Did you have like a chronological timeline that you wrote out for yourself, or did you kind of go with the flow? Like I don't know if you've ever heard the term with writing, you're either, what is it? You're either a plotter or a pantser. Yeah, so you're either like plotting as you go, like you know exactly where you're headed, or you kind of go by the seat of your pants. So what is the process like for you, and in particular with this book, which is so complicated and complex?
That's a great question. I didn't figure out that this book was complicated until people started reading it. I think the true answer is because I'm mentally ill. I'm sort of between planner and plotter. I'm sort of both. I always kind of know where I'm going, but I'm also ready to scrap it and and throw that away and change it to something else. This book sort of came to me both in pieces and very much like all at once. I write towards imagery a lot of the time. So I'll have an image like a painting in my head, and then it's about getting there, and sometimes getting there takes a very long time. And that was helpful for me. I had, things like the timeline adjusted and all of that, but I always had sort of signposts of where I was going. And I didn't write the book chronologically. In fact, the first draft of this book is way more out of sync than what we ended up getting, which I really enjoyed that process of, being like, what can I keep sort of out of sync, and what do I need, and when do I need it, in terms of what kind of information a reader needs to stay with me. Because I think this was sort of an experiment in seeing how people would stay with me. But the odd thing is that I never wrote down a single note or timeline. I just kind of kept it all in my head. And that meant when I was editing too, there were little errors. But yeah, mostly I always kind of knew each story beat and where it was going. And there's some things that stayed non-chronological, because to me, I think the emotional payoff is more important than, or emotional catharsis is more important than, like, I guess, the chronological events. So there were some things where, even though it went out of order, there were some things where I was like, well, this thing in the future, if it goes where it's supposed to in the future, then this other part of the book won't be very sad, will it? Because So I sort of, the order that I wrote in and felt in was very much informed by what kind of like emotional through line I could bring to it. Because I didn't really think of it as this massive, like I didn't notice that I'd written a book that went over 1,000 years, because I just sort of, I did everything for, the main character's name is Daisy, and I did everything sort of for her and how that would draw, I guess.
I was gonna kind of ask you, like, how did the story begin? Maybe you already answered it with, it began with this character Daisy, who's the cyborg character, right? Who may or may not be inspired by Molly from Neuromancer, was kind of what I had in mind.
Didn't
not at all.
Occur to me
Okay.
slightly.
Big Molly energy there. But also, like, the city of Toronto plays a huge role in this book. So kind of where did the book begin for you? You said you worked toward images. So on the one hand, like, did it begin with setting in place with the city of Toronto? And also, like, in tandem with that, how did your experience of living in Toronto feed into or influence this narrative as well?
That's a great question, and I'm going to bounce it back at you in a way at the end. It did sort of start with, as was said in my CV, that I published a novella called Visitation Seeds in 2020, which is actually just the first chapter of this. So there's very much proof that I started there. But I started with Daisy. I started with this character, and but for setting, I wrote the first words of this book. I mean, the first chapter is sort of set in this weird sort of like, what if London was on the moon? And I started this book in London, England in 2019, like just the opening line, just the very first page. And there are other funny, sort of, I think, it's sort of a joke about colonialism of like, well, if humans colonized other planets, what would that look like? But if Canada colonized another planet, they just try to build London, England again. Or they just try to build the UK again, because Canada's not very good at identity. But the reason that I talked about Toronto in this book, and the way that I talked about it is, I sort of wrote this book as, well, I've lived there all my life, and it was very much sort of my city in that way. But I wrote this book as I knew I was going to be leaving. I don't live in Toronto anymore. I currently live in Calgary, Alberta, where I'm doing my doctorate. And while I hadn't applied to Calgary yet, I started writing this book because I started sitting and thinking about wanting to do a PhD, wanting to do a doctorate, and not wanting to go to the University of Toronto, which meant odds are I was going to be leaving. So a large part of the setting of this book is the city that I grew up in, sort of like a long breakup letter. Like it's like me saying goodbye. I just kind of like to bounce that back at you if you're open to it, in that there are many settings in Cicada Summer, but that's sort of that central one of Hush's grandfather's house, and that sort of like an aesthetic and vibe. I'd also love to know how like place informed you come into this, and also because I'm so curious about this sort of novel, but also non-novel, that you have this through line of how did you come to like Husha and Nani and Husha's grandfather? Like how did you come to this as that sort of, I guess, central place that wraps around all the other places of the book?
Sure, thanks. So the book is, if you don't know, the book is set in like cottage country, Ontario, which I'm familiar with because my parents actually own a cottage in cottage country, Ontario, and it's also set during the pandemic. And I feel like this cottage country space, like kind of the Muskokas area, was a very privileged space to be in during the pandemic. It's kind of where you could exist and pretend that nothing was happening because you're outside the city. Like your book takes part in the city, right? And you have all of these just different characters to contend with and these different lives to go off of. I wanted to put my characters in more of a private and isolated space because they're dealing with this huge grief. Like the main character, Husha, her mother has recently died. And really I imagined it like, what would it be like to have that space and time to deal with that grief? To heal and move on, and something in me feels like that can't happen properly in a city space. Maybe I'm just more like a country person at heart, but it was a space for them to kind of be in that privileged position, right? To pretend that nothing else was going on beyond their own like small disaster, which always feels like a big disaster to you. So mostly I was writing about something that was familiar to me while trying to criticize it, while uplifting it, showing that paradoxically these spaces outside the city can be very safe and wonderful, but with the acknowledgement that like not everyone can have those spaces, especially during a time like the pandemic. Okay. I have a question. My favorite part of your book was between Morgan and Maid. So there's a character in the book named Morgan who ends up, she's like tending to the moon from this spaceship, and she creates a little android out of a toaster. And there's a very cute relationship between the two of them. He's a he, I guess. Is it he?
Yeah, he genders himself.
He genders himself, yeah, and he says, "What's my name?" And she's like, "I don't know, I made you." And he's like, "I'm Maid. So his name becomes Maid.
I think for opening line, I think he actually goes, "I'm Maid." He doesn't, like, he picks them,
Yeah. Anyway, their relationship is really adorable. So I kind of want to ask you, what was your favorite part of writing this book? Do you have a favorite part? Maybe it was torturous the whole way through. What was your experience of the writing in that sense?
I made a joke about this, I think, at dinner, but writing is never torturous to me. Thinking about writing is, and submitting writing, and going places to read, and convincing people to print it, and fixing the spelling, and talking about it, and all of that. But the actually writing for me is always, when I'm actually doing it, and I force myself to do it, is always a joy. It is, this, I get very manic. I have a little, like sort of like a bar table in my little apartment, and the reason I got it is because I was like, well, at the beginning of the story that I'm writing, I'm going to be sitting, and I'm going to write 2 lines at a time, and I'm going to look angry. And then for the last 1,000 words of whatever it is, I'm going to be standing up while I type really quickly. So, I sort of love tumbling into writing, and this is very much a novel. But I still sort of wrote the chapters like short stories. Like I approached them each as its own thing. Like that section that I read from today, if that's too weird and it's not your jam, don't worry. None of the chapters are written in the same voice or the same sort of first person to third person present tense to multiple characters to. But my favorite thing to write comes quite near the end of the book, and it is with Morgan and Maeve have come back. But my favorite section to write was probably the 11th chapter, which is partially an epistolary section of the novel. And first, it was exciting to write because it was finally, after a year of writing this, I was like, there's time travel in this book, and that's a spoiler, but also that's the category that it's under and on Amazon.com, so I guess it's not much of a spoiler. But I finally, near the end of the book, I'm like, okay, I'm going to explain what that time travel was doing there, and I'm going to explain how these characters came to be. And I did it in terms of, these two used to be women who started this novel, Daisy and Morgan, who begin, I think, around 2060 as these two activists who very much fail, but they don't quite die. But each thinks the other died, and they were sort of reunited through letters 1,000 years later. And Morgan's become this vast mechanical thing up on Mars, and Daisy's become this huge tubular piece of moving plant life. So they've both changed in such wild ways. And instead of me being like, oh yeah, it's an episode of Star Trek where the science officer will explain what happened, I was like, I would like the explanation to almost entirely be love letters. And so that was my favorite. And I almost read from that tonight, and I should have. But that I think was my favorite part of writing this book, of sort of approaching the way that these two people who were not what they are not recognizable to each other in any way, and the way that they're in this very pressing and apocalyptic moment, they're still like waxing poetic and being like, I remember how soft your hands are. Oh, also we're all gonna die. Like this big sort of, like vast world, and it sort of shrinks down again to this sort of grief about this relationship. I love what you said about, like out in the country, just take the time to grieve, because I think the reason that my book goes for 1,000 years is because, I think you're kind of right. I think in some ways urban spaces where you can't shut out the world, that's about how long it takes these two people to grieve, not necessarily just their relationship, but like their own lives. It takes them about a millennium. So that was my favorite part. I'm being very lazy, but your questions are fun. So I'd also love to know, like, I have favorite parts of Cicada Summer. In particular, mine is I think she's a marine biologist, and in one of the stories written by Hush's mother, and it's this woman who finds this fish they find fish covered in eyes, and my favorite image of Cicada Summer is she's like, there's something in the back of my head. She looks and she cuts, and then an eyeball opens, and then she's slowly covered in more and more I love eyeballs. Big on that. And I love that image in that scene, but like I'm curious what part of this, in writing it for you, it is a very sad book in some ways, like what part for you was like joy?
couple things. Quickly going off what you said about grief and time, like it's interesting because your book spans 1,000 years. Mine is just a short moment in the summer. It goes a little bit over a month, I think, but it's designed so as if they're like, at the beginning it says, there's a clock ticking on the wall and it's an anachronistic place, and it's basically supposed to be like a space without time where they can deal with their grief. But I like what you said, it takes them 1,000 years to deal with their grief. I don't know if the characters in my story ever do, even in this like tomb of non-time. So yeah, it's an interesting thing just to bounce off what you said about time. But in terms of joy in writing, I think in this book, the most fun that I always have is with the creepy stuff. And it's not a full-on horror novel, but I think like I always have the most fun when my brain comes up with creepy weird things, like a fish covered in eyeballs, which then contaminates a marine biologist, and she has fish growing on her head. I'm like looking at people giving me eyes in the audience. Those are when I have the most fun, but I don't actually have a lot of joy while I'm writing, I would say. It's more of like a meditative space for me, where emotions are kind of at the sidelines. So I wouldn't call it joy per se, but I would say like the most fruitful times of my writing in this book are the ones that have to do with grief, that are the slower sentences that are more meandering. But if I ever get a spark of joy, it's when there's something creepy that happens and disgusting.
I just want to say,
I find that so interesting because on the surface, I think Cicada Summer seems very focused on like writing on emotions of the characters, but it's coming in from this meditative space, and I think a lot of the time my writing seems very analytically very focused on plot and very focused on sort of that almost like I guess only coming from the head, but I'm writing from an entirely emotional space. I like that contrast. That's fun. I don't have a question for that.
Do you have more questions for me? Otherwise, it might be time to bounce off to the audience. I have a couple more, but kind of like I'm easing you into it if you have questions. This is like the teacher of me coming out. Get ready. I'm going to ask you.
You sort of answered my last one that I was going to ask already, so I'm happy to shoot to the crowd.
Okay.
Hi, crowd.
Do we have any questions from the audience? If not.